Well, the anti-corruption issue in the G20 is one of these sort of unanticipated questions. It's been brewing for a long time in the G8. There's certainly a certain amount of momentum, but it's probably the real momentum was in other organizations, the OECD, the UN sort of convention against corruption. What the G20 did, and I think was probably it's sort of an indicator of its general use, is sort of as a catalyst to sort of bring about sort of the different mix of countries. Obviously the old countries of the G8 together with sort of the new grouping, the BRICS and so on. And that gave it, I think, a heft that the G8 didn't have, and also the timeliness of the issue. I mean, whether it's the Arab Spring, whether it's the issues sort of related, you know, going back to the G20 finance in terms of terrorism financing and so on. There was sort of a real appetite, I think, for a new sort of push through the G20. So in that regard, we can see that probably in some ways the anti-corruption issue is sort of a generic one, like I say, the sort of catalytic role. But I think there's some sort of unique characteristics of it. And of course, one of those characteristics is the fact that there's such a buy-in from civil society and to some extent from business. And I think even though they have different perspectives on the anti-corruption issue, it's interesting that unlike a lot of issues where it's hard to get that type of interest and sort of validation from those groups, there's no problem. And indeed, we see civil society groups like Transparency International, business groups, the International Chamber of Commerce, pushing very hard for something much more sort of tough and with teeth in terms of the anti-corruption initiative. In terms of looking at the French G20 summit, of course, what are we going to see? I mean, in some ways, we'll see that push coming to fruition. The French, along with the Indonesians, have given a lot of attention through working groups on the anti-corruption issue. But of course, there's also sort of risks and dangers with the European debt deficit problems. There's a lot of distraction, and of course, there's a lot of other sort of issues on the table that might sort of take away the corruption issue. I think there's probably two things. One, as I've said before, there's a sense among not just the old G8 countries, but the larger group, and India is a good example, that there has to be something, you know, that sort of comes from the groundswell and comes from top down in terms of anti-corruption. I think this is going to put a new emphasis. And even Indonesia, there was a cabinet change a week or so ago that sort of brought the corruption issue, that more needs to be done. Was probably where we're going to see the most focus, though, is through sort of the new sort of organization. Of course, that's the B20, the business group, where I think the conjunction was probably the OECD sort of push on anti-corruption, the push by the International Chamber of Commerce, but probably this is where we're going to see some sort of real sort of animation of the approach. And most probably if we see something coming out of Cannes, most probably this is where we're going to see it. I think there's sort of real appetite, as I've said, for this issue. It's been unanticipated that we'll get this far, but at the same time, a lot of sort of risks, a lot of distractions, and probably could take away from it. We just hope, because I think the timing is right. There's a sense that the G20, as a catalytic organization, can play a role on this type of issue.